The wind howled like a living beast as the freight train crawled through the frozen Canadian wilderness. It was a brutal winter night, with temperatures plunging below 22°F and snowdrifts piling high against the tracks, threatening to derail everything. At the controls, John Silva, a 45-year-old conductor with over 2 decades on the rails, gripped the throttle with calloused hands. Known for his grit and quiet resolve, John was used to weeks of solitude, hauling cargo through untamed forests, where human company was a rarity. His routine was clockwork: check the tracks, monitor the weather, and keep the train moving, no matter the odds. But tonight felt different. The radio crackled with warnings of a record-breaking blizzard, and John knew the next few days would be a fight for survival, for him and the train. Suddenly, a faint, guttural sound broke through the engine's hum, a weak growl, nearly drowned by the storm's roar. John frowned, leaning toward the frost-covered window. Under the flickering glow of the train's headlights, he spotted a massive shape, a grizzly bear, frozen in place on the tracks, 2 tiny cubs clinging to her side. Their bodies shivered violently, ice crusting their fur, and the mother bear's eyes gleamed with a silent, desperate plea. Out here in the dead of winter, they shouldn't even be awake, let alone fighting to survive. John's heart raced as the train inched closer, a collision inevitable unless he acted fast. John's breath caught in his throat as the train's headlights illuminated the grizzly bear and her cubs, their fur matted with snow and ice. The mother's massive frame blocked the tracks, her legs trembling under the weight of exhaustion, while the cubs whimpered, their tiny paws slipping on the frozen steel. A collision was seconds away. With a curse under his breath, John slammed the emergency brake, the train screeching to a halt just feet from the trio. The jolt threw him forward, but his eyes stayed locked on the animals. This wasn't just a wildlife sighting. This was a life-or-death standoff. Stepping to the conductor's door, John hesitated. His training screamed at him to stay inside, to let nature take its course. Bears were dangerous, especially a desperate mother, and the company's protocol was clear: avoid contact at all costs. But the cubs' pitiful cries pierced the storm, and the mother's gaze, wild yet pleading, stirred something deep within him. He grabbed a heavy coat and a flashlight, his hands shaking. Not from the cold, but from the weight of the decision. Cracking the door open, he shouted, "Hey, get off the tracks!" The bear flinched but didn't move, her strength fading fast. For hours, John watched from the doorway, the storm raging outside. The train's heat offered some warmth, but the bears remained exposed, their bodies sinking deeper into the snow. He rummaged through the caboose, finding old blankets and a thermos of hot water, supplies meant for emergencies, not wildlife. Tossing a high blanket toward them, he winced as it landed short, the wind whipping it away. The mother bear nudged her cubs closer, shielding them with her body, and John felt a pang of guilt. He wasn't a hero, he was a rail worker, not a rescuer. Yet, the image of those cubs freezing haunted him. By dawn, the storm eased slightly, revealing the bears still alive but weaker. John rigged a makeshift ramp with a plank from the cargo hold, easing it toward the tracks. The mother bear, sensing a chance, dragged herself and the cubs onto it, her movement sluggish but determined. John's heart pounded as he guided them toward the train's storage compartment, a small, insulated space off the main cabin. Against every instinct, he opened the door wider, letting the bears stumble inside. The mother collapsed, cubs nestled against her, and for the first time, John saw a flicker of trust in her eyes. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental. Now the real challenge began, keeping them alive, and himself. Brizo's awesome. Let's move on to Chapter 3. Development 2, 650, 750 words. For the adapted theme, bear freezes with cubs near a train. The conductor at the door does the unexpected. This chapter will deepen the challenges, highlight the evolving relationship between John and the bears, include small victories, and feature a mini CTA to engage the audience. The narrative remains in American English, adhering to the guidelines. The storage compartment of the freight train hummed with the low rumble of the idling engine, a stark contrast to the howling blizzard outside. John stood at the threshold, staring at the grizzly bear and her two cubs huddled in the corner. The mother's massive frame barely fit, her fur still crusted with ice, while the cubs, barely bigger than puppies, pressed against her for warmth. The air inside was chilly, but a far cry from the deadly cold beyond the walls. John's heart thudded as he realized the gravity of his choice. He'd broken every rule in the book by letting them in, and now he was responsible for their survival and his own. The first hours were tense. The mother bear growled low, her eyes tracking John's every move as he cautiously approached with a blanket. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from the uncertainty of handling a wild animal. He draped the blanket over the cubs, avoiding the mother's reach, and retreated quickly. To his surprise, she didn't lunge. Instead, she sniffed the fabric, then nudged it closer to her offspring, a key. Subtle sign of acceptance. John exhaled, a small victory amid the chaos. He rigged a heat lamp from the maintenance kit, positioning it to warm the space without overwhelming the bears. The cubs' whimpers softened, and the mother's breathing steadied, a fragile truce forming. Food was the next hurdle. John had emergency rations, dried meat and granola bars, but nothing suited a bear's diet. Rummaging through the cargo, he found a crate of oats intended for livestock feed. He mixed it with hot water from his thermos, creating a sloppy mash, and slid it toward the bears with a stick. The mother hesitated, then lapped at it, her cubs following suit. Their hunger was palpable, and John felt a pang of relief as they ate. Yet the storm showed no mercy, battering the train with gusts that rocked the cars. The radio crackled with static. No help was coming. John's isolation deepened, the weight of the decision pressing on him. What if the mother turned aggressive? What if the cubs didn't survive? Over the next day, a rhythm emerged. John checked on them hourly, leaving water and more mash, his movements slow and deliberate. The mother began to relax, her growls fading into soft huffs. One cub, bolder than the other, waddled toward John, sniffing his boot. He froze, but the mother only watched, her gaze less hostile. Emboldened, John tossed a scrap of jerky against his better judgment, and the cub snatched it, retreating to its mother. A faint grunt from her felt like approval. It was a breakthrough, a bond forged in the unlikeliest of places. The challenges mounted, though. The train's fuel was dwindling, and the tracks ahead were buried under snowdrifts, stranding them. John spent hours shoveling from the conductor's cab, his muscles aching while the bear's condition improved slowly. The mother's fur began to dry, her strength returning, and the cub's eyes brightened. Yet doubt gnawed at him. He wasn't a wildlife expert. Could he really save them? The storm's end was uncertain, and the company would fire him if they knew. Still, each time the mother met his gaze, he felt a quiet resolve. They were in this together. As night fell, John sat by the door, listening to the cubs' playful grunts. The mother rested her head on her paws, watching him with what might have been gratitude. It was a small step, but it fueled his determination. Have you ever faced a moment where compassion overruled caution? Drop your story in the comments below. We'd love to hear how you rose to the challenge. The freight train groaned under the weight of the unending blizzard, its engine sputtering as fuel reserves dwindled to a critical low. Inside the insulated storage compartment, the grizzly bear and her cubs huddled closer, their breaths visible in the dim light of the heat lamp. John Silva wiped sweat from his brow despite the cold, his mind racing. 3 days had passed since he'd let the bears into the train, and their condition had improved. The mother's fur was regrowing, the cubs' playful tumbles a sign of life. But the storm had other plans. The tracks ahead were buried under a 10-foot snowdrift, and the radio, now a useless hiss, offered no rescue. John was stranded, and the bears' survival hung by a thread. The turning point came at dusk. A deafening crack split the air. A tree, uprooted by the wind, crashed onto the tracks just beyond the train, blocking any hope of movement. The impact shook the cars, and the mother bear reared up, a guttural roar echoing as the cubs squealed in panic. John stumbled to the door, heart pounding. The storage compartment's wall buckled slightly, a hairline fracture spreading from the impact. If the train shifted or the storm worsened, the bears could be crushed. He had to act, but the options were grim. Stay put and risk collapse, or venture out into the blizzard to clear the tracks, a move that could kill him in minutes. Torn by instinct and duty, John weighed his choices. The company would crucify him for endangering the cargo, and his survival training screamed to prioritize himself. Yet the mother bear's eyes, now steady, almost trusting, haunted him. He couldn't abandon them after bringing them this far. Grabbing a shovel, rope, and his thickest coat, he cracked the door open. The wind blasted him, snow stinging his face, but he pressed forward, tying the rope to the train's handle for safety. The tree loomed ahead, its branches tangled with ice, a Herculean task for one man. His arms burned as he hacked at it, the cold seeping into his bones. Each swing felt futile against the storm's fury. Then, a shadow moved. The mother bear, limping but determined, emerged from the compartment, her cubs trailing behind. John froze, shovel raised, expecting an attack. Instead, she lumbered to the tree, using her massive paws to break branches, her strength amplifying his efforts. The cubs, though small, pawed at the snow, clearing debris. Together, they worked, man and bear in an unlikely alliance. After an hour, the track was partially clear, enough for the train to move if the engine held. Exhausted, John retreated inside, the bears following. The mother collapsed beside him, her breath ragged but victorious, a cub nuzzling his boot in thanks. The triumph was short-lived. The engine coughed, then died, the fuel gone. Darkness fell, and the temperature plummeted further. John realized they were out of time. Without heat, the bears would perish, and he'd follow. Desperation fueled. A final gamble. He disconnected the storage car, using the last of the battery to power a small heater, isolating it from the lifeless engine. It was a long shot, but the bears' warmth returned, their snores a faint hope. Have you ever pushed beyond your limits for someone or something in need? Share your story in the comments below. We're all in this together. The silence inside the disconnected storage car was heavy, broken only by the soft snores of the grizzly bear and her cubs. John Silva sat against the wall, his body aching from the hours spent battling the storm, but a quiet warmth spread through him. The small heater, powered by the train's dying battery, had held through the night, keeping the compartment just warm enough to stave off the deadly cold. Outside, the blizzard finally broke, the first rays of dawn piercing through the clouds, casting a golden glow over the snow-covered tracks. For the first time in days, John felt a flicker of hope. The bears were alive, their fur fluffed and dry, the cubs nestled against their mother's side, their tiny paws twitching in sleep. As the sun rose, John cracked open the door, the crisp air biting but no longer lethal. The mother bear stirred, her eyes meeting his with a clarity that felt almost human. She rose slowly, nudging her cubs awake, and lumbered toward the open door. John stepped aside, his heart pounding, not from fear, but from a strange sense of connection. The mother paused at the threshold, turning back to look at him. For a fleeting moment, her gaze held a quiet gratitude, a silent acknowledgement of the bond they'd forged in the face of death. Then, with a low huff, she led her cubs into the snow, their paw prints trailing toward the forest. John watched until they disappeared among the trees, a lump in his throat. They were free, and so was he. The aftermath brought unexpected change. A rescue crew arrived hours later, clearing the tracks and towing the train to the nearest station. John's story spread like wildfire, first among the rail workers, then online, when a co-worker posted a photo of the storage car, its door still ajar, captioned, "Conductor saves bear family in blizzard." The post went viral, catching the attention of wildlife organizations. They reached out to John, offering to fund a sanctuary near the tracks, a safe haven for bears displaced by harsh winters. The rail company, initially furious, softened under public pressure, turning John's rule-breaking into a PR win. They even donated to the sanctuary, naming it Silva's Haven in his honor. John wasn't the same man who'd started that journey. The solitude of the rails had always been his refuge, a place to escape a world that felt too loud. But saving the bears had cracked something open inside him. He started training others at the company, sharing survival tips for wildlife encounters. His once quiet voice now steady as he spoke of the mother bear's trust. The sanctuary thrived, drawing visitors who left notes of their own stories. "Your courage gave me hope." John kept one pinned beside his conductor's cap, a reminder of the night he'd found his purpose. Months later, John stood at the sanctuary's edge, watching a group of school kids learn about bear habitats. A familiar shape caught his eye, a grizzly with 2 growing cubs lingering at the forest's edge. The mother bear's head tilted, her gaze locking onto his, and John smiled, knowing it was her. She didn't approach, but her presence was enough, a silent promise that some bonds never break. John and the bear's story shows that even in the darkest storms, compassion can light the way. If their journey moved you, hit the like button now. It's a nod to everyone daring to care against the odds. Subscribe to join our community of believers where stories like this spark connection. Share with someone who needs a lift and comment, "What's the bravest thing you've done for another?"